It is really important to have these kinds of conversations. It doesn't need to be long. It can be 5 minutes long, but it needs to have respect. It needs to have clarity around what you're talking about. One of the most important skill sets that senior leaders needs to have is the ability to have critical conversations, right? So let me talk a little bit about this, but before I do, let me ask you something. Critical conversations, what comes to your mind? Standards, okay. What else? So what you're saying in essence is when we're talking about critical conversations, we're about to talk to somebody that knows a standard, but they haven't met it. So it has a negative tone to it to some degree, right? Hey, you're supposed to be doing this, you're not doing it. Let's have a critical conversation. So we have a negative critical conversation, which everyone's mind always goes to. But I also say this, there's a positive one too, and you gotta make sure that you guys all heard criticize in private, praise in public, right? In essence, praise in public is to some degree a critical conversation. When you're seeing somebody do really well and you start to point that out, one, personally, one-on-one, hey, you're doing this really well. I think this is gonna get you ahead. This is what's helping for you. This is what's working for you right now. That's a critical conversation, and you don't want to miss that, because when somebody is winning and you're pointing out why they're winning, that's a key for them to know, okay, this is working for me. That's a feedback, right? So that's the positive one. But negative one, we all know what that means, but I want to talk a little bit about how to have it, right? First thing first, when you're having a critical conversation that's going to be more negative in tone, first thing it needs to have is respect, okay? You never get anything out of having a critical conversation, and you are in essence, making somebody feel like crap, right? You're talking to someone like crap. The goal of a critical conversation is not to get someone disempowered, discouraged, disheartened, right? So it needs to actually have a common respect. Because if you're not, all you're doing is creating unnecessary enemies in your own team, right? So when you're having it, make sure that it's done with some class. Second of all, this is the part that gets missed most. I think people generally will have a respectful, critical conversation, but I think most people miss the clarity. And here's the reason why. You want to have a critical conversation, but you don't want to be too clear because you're uncomfortable having it. So you're starting to beat around the bush. You're not really saying what you're meant to say. And by the time it's done, the person that you talk to knows that you had a conversation with them. It's just they don't really know what happens when they don't follow through, right? Which is why whenever you have a critical conversation, one of the things that you do is you follow it up with, do you know what will happen if you don't hit this, if you don't meet this? What does this mean? Do you know, right? Because the answer to that question shows to you how much clarity they have after that critical conversation. When you're having a critical conversation around standards, right? Hey, you're not doing so well, your performance is down, you're not meeting the numbers, we really need you to step up. Is there clarity in that conversation? No. Sure, it's done with respect, you're trying to not break the person that you're talking to, but it's not done with clarity, right? That person just walked away from the conversation with you, and they know something is up, but they don't know what that means. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So you need to have a very clear conversation when you are having a critical conversation. All right, next one. If you're not doing this, don't even bother having critical conversation, but you need to have management or data-backed conversation, right? When you're having a conversation, most people that don't have a data-backed logic or reason behind that conversation, what do you think happens? It's usually emotional backed conversation, right? I feel like you're not doing this. No, listen, here's the numbers, you're not doing this. When you're having a conversation, critical conversation, obviously listen, you need to be a good leader, but you also need to be a good manager, right? And management part is you look at the numbers on a daily basis, you look at the data on a regular basis to make sure that, you know what, I need to have a critical conversation with this guy. I'm looking at the raw data and it's just not getting it, she's not getting it. Right? So sure enough, it needs to be data-backed. Otherwise, it's always going to be emotional. And whenever you're just having emotional-backed conversations, people just had a conversation with you, but all you did was spew how you feel about them, in essence. Here's something else I want to put out as a bonus in there. State facts, ask open-ended questions. hey, Sultan, you've been late 3 times in a row. Is there anything I need to know about, right? And then you shut up and you let them do all the talking. It is really important to have these kinds of conversations. And listen, it doesn't need to be long. It can be 5 minutes long, right? But it needs to have respect. It needs to have clarity around what you're talking about. It needs to be data backed, right? And one of the ways, the strategy of having this is you don't necessarily say, I heard you did this, or no, this is what you did, and help me understand, right? The questions, if you want a kind of like a structure to ask those questions, it's the 3 C's. You guys know what the 3 C's are? I'm curious, I'm concerned, I'm confused, right? Hey John, I'm confused. You told me you wanted to become an owner, so let me understand, how does this get you closer to that goal, right? Or I'm curious to know the decisions that you're making, what are they doing to get you closer to your goal, right? So those are just some of the things that, by the way, you can use this in a sale too, but in a critical conversation, even more. And this way, when you're done, a person walks away from you with, first of all, with respect because you didn't derail them, but second of all, like, you know what, I can't keep doing this. Or if I want to keep doing this, I need to get out of here. So today's Thursday, great time to have critical conversations with the guys that are not on pace to hit their mark, right? So let's just say Sunday rolls around and you're about to, terminate somebody because they didn't meet the metrics. Problem is you didn't have a critical conversation today, or maybe you did and there was no clarity to it, right? Hey, your numbers are down. Really need you to step up. Does that person know that by Saturday, if they didn't hit that? No, right? Hey, listen, if this number is not met by Saturday, 9 p.m., like I love you. I think you're a great team member. I think you have a lot of potential, but we're gonna have to part ways. Standards are standards. It's black and white, right? It's meant to take the emotions out of running a team. Or if it's someone that has a potential, in our case, maybe we're saying if this number is not met, we might have to talk about part-timing you, right? Because you're just not getting it.